Awesome. Excited to jump in and appreciate basically everyone staying through the entirety of this webinar thus far and chat about hotel visitation. Last week, if you remember, we looked at, we had New York City and Company join us and present their dashboard on visitation to public areas. And essentially, we're seeing the same question resonate across the country in tourism, which is, what are people doing and who are these people? It's a simple question because most quote unquote tourist locations are closed, even some public ones like hiking trails or parks or beaches in some parts of our country are closed and other parts of the country it's open. So it's tough to take one observation and apply it to everyone in America or even the world. We do a lot of work in Europe and Australia and Asia as well. But one thing we decided to dig a bit deeper into is the idea of hotels. Who are staying at hotels? And again, that's a really broad topic because there are a lot of different types of hotels. There's airport hotels, urban hotels, resorts out in the middle of nowhere. But as we started digging into STR reports, we saw a lot of properties were getting upwards of 20% occupancy rates. And I thought that personally was impressive. And it's definitely an odd day when we think upwards of 20% occupancy is impressive. But essentially, we wanted to ask ourselves, who are these guests? And sort of paint a picture of them to help hotels understand who their guests are and how that may have changed. We started to focus our analysis on 5-star properties. As I mentioned, there's a lot of different hotels in the world, but we honed in on 5-star hotels because that's where we're seeing a different type of visitor anecdotally. So we're seeing a lot of essential workers staying at urban properties, but not necessarily the 5-star hotels. We're seeing airline crews continue to stay at properties near airports, but again, that's not 5-star hotels. So when we think about 5-star hotels like Ritz-Carlton, Waldorf Astoria, and Four Seasons, we think of it more as a leisure getaway that's happening really right now, especially. A lot of people do go on business trips and stay at these types of properties, but for the most part, right now, we're seeing mostly leisure guests at these properties. Why do people stay at 5-star hotels, both pre and post-COVID? There's a lot of reasons. Events, visiting family and not wanting to stay with the family, quick getaways, staycations. Here in LA, perhaps they're getting plastic surgery and they're staying in the hotel. But what we're seeing, interestingly enough, before and after COVID, and the way we got this data, as you should know, is we have almost every hotel chain in the country in our database. So we're measuring daily activity at basically every chain hotel in the country every single day. And so we picked out these 3 brands to understand pre and post. You'll see very different, obviously, occupancies dropping across the map for all these properties, but you're seeing the same peaks and valleys, both pre and post COVID, which essentially, if you just look at those dates, are weekdays versus weekends. We're seeing valleys on the weekdays, we're seeing peaks on the weekends. And that's where we're seeing that sometimes upwards of 25% occupancy is on the weekends. So you can go next slide, I'll show that. So we wanted to understand who these guests were. And the way we do that is, again, with our methodology of understanding common evening locations. So where do people live? But first, we wanted to understand just the amount of distance people live from these properties. And again, this is summarizing across the country. We'll go into a specific property after this. But as we summarize this across the country, it's interesting to see, okay, pre-COVID, interesting, obviously, a lot of long haul guests, some short haul, a lot of driving distance people. We put that at 100 miles. But if you look at it post-COVID, you'll see a pretty stark change that I bet it's not going to surprise any of us to understand we see a higher percentage of people within driving distance and a smaller percentage of people who are essentially this long haul traveler. Believe it or not, we still do see people traveling around the country. We have plenty of data that show on cities that people are experiencing visitors from other states and other DMAs. But essentially, as we look at hotels across the board, we see a pretty significant drop in long haul and a significant increase in driving distance, which makes a lot of sense. But rather than generalize this, we can look at it a little more specifically, which is what we recommend anyone do that for their own city or their own properties or their own competitive set. So here we're looking at a luxury property in Santa Barbara. That's just north of Los Angeles. Santa Barbara still has their beaches open. It's driving distance from Los Angeles, as well as a lot of other places in California. And if we look before COVID-19 happened, and I'm going to point out just two things on here. Obviously, people are always coming from around the country, but we're still seeing Los Angeles, which is a drive market, as their #1 visitor at 25%. So even before COVID, we're seeing people doing maybe not staycations because they're not really in Santa Barbara, but they're definitely leaving the Los Angeles market and staying. And then Santa Barbara, the county of, we're seeing only about 18% of their visitors. So the quote unquote hyper local visitor is #2 on this at 18%. Now, if we see post-COVID, interestingly enough, Los Angeles is almost at the exact same percentage. So people are still leaving basically Los Angeles and going to this property. I believe this is over the weekends as well, almost at the same rate. So their pull from the Los Angeles, that drive market, is the same rate. But their quote unquote, I would call a staycation market, which is the same DMA that they're in the Santa Barbara one, has increased dramatically. They're seeing a lot more people, perhaps who are really, really familiar with the property, going and staying there. And that really resonates to me because a lot of the locals in Santa Barbara will know this property. They'll have perhaps been there, even if it's just for lunch to this property. They are very familiar with the brand and perhaps the standards and cleanliness and honestly the trustworthiness that this property may have, which is perhaps why we're seeing such a stark increase of quote unquote hyper locals going and staying at this property, even in a post-COVID world. Just really interesting to see that. One thing which was really interesting too is you can literally right now get, you can book 5-star hotels at like 2 or 3-star prices, which is bittersweet for this world. In fact, I just got off a call with someone who booked late August round trip to Greece from New York for $300. So there's definitely opportunity to take advantage of some of these previously expensive opportunities at a little bit of a discount. And what's really interesting is we use demographic data as we looked across the board to understand what's the demographics of people who stay at 5-star hotels before and after COVID-19. And what we're seeing here is and there's obviously a lot more than just income, but what we're seeing is the median household income dropped over 10%. So we're seeing actually a new demographic. We're seeing people who maybe said, you know, I couldn't afford that previously, but heck, at 50 or even 60% off, yeah, I would love to go stay at that 5-star hotel and get out of my apartment or condo or wherever I am, which is a massive shift and a massive opportunity and honestly a new market for 5-star hotels or for destinations that have luxury properties there. And of course, this isn't necessarily for right here, right now, but as we go through the recovery process and we perhaps see luxury hotel rates stay low, we'll be able to have a new demographic that might want to take advantage of those luxury properties. So to sum it up, and I had to come up with only 3 things right here is, well, the first one being we always love to match occupancy changes and rates with the origin markets that are actually staying at these properties. Especially at a time like this, it allows us to be really, really effective with our marketing budgets, whether we're a destination or whether we're actually a hospitality chain. For these staycations and driving distance, we all think about locals and hyper locals, but that Santa Barbara example shows that there is actually a difference potentially between people staycationing, maybe they live in the exact same city or area, and people who might be driving from 100 or 200 miles away. Those could be very, very different markets. The people driving from 200 miles away maybe have never really heard of your property, but want to go stay in that area. Whereas the people doing staycations might be really familiar with your brand, and the fact that they want to emphasize their sort of loyalty and stay there, they would essentially love to experience it with you. And so it's about more winning that customer over that is already familiar with you. And of course, the third one here, and this is more about historical data that we've had, I guess you could say a lot of fun or intrigue looking at here at UberMedia, is to understand, if you think about, let's say May, June, July last year, what percentage of your guests were from outside of America? What percentage were from even Canada, because we can't travel to and from Canada right now? What percentage of them were the statistically, understanding, a long haul visitor who might be flying in? If you can understand these origin markets last year, you can do a little more calculations to understand how you might be impacted by the fact that these people perhaps are unable to or might not want to come and stay at your property. So just good to keep in your back of your mind as we go through the coming months. And that was my segment.
All right, thanks, Evan. So we do have some questions here for you. And I know we're hitting the top of the hour, so we're gonna go through these pretty quickly. But I think one of our guests had a question about luxury hotels in general. And if the data was shown for actually luxury hotel specifically, if this luxury hotels household demographics was specifically for the Santa Barbara or for all luxury hotels. And so I think I'll answer this one. So for this slide, we are looking at all luxury hotels and what that general change of income is for all hotels. Let's see, another question here. What is the source for demographics? So for the demographics here, we do use the common evening locations of the devices, and we pull what census block groups those common evening locations are from. And so we get a weighted average, and you weigh that against the American Community Survey data from the US Census Bureau in order to come up with household demographics. Another question here is, how do you determine the median income of guests, and can that be paired with purchase data? So I just answered that question. It's based off of census data, and it can be paired with purchase data that maybe you get from MasterCard or your point of sales data or anything like that.